You may not be familiar with the name Frank William Abignale Jr., but if you have seen the movie Catch Me If You Can, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks, you have seen a glimpse of his story, as it was based on Frank's real-life story and events. Frank William Abignale had impersonated a Pan-American pilot, a pediatric supervising doctor, and a lawyer, charming everyone he met and bouncing checks all over the world, all of that by the age of 21. In today's video, we will take a look at the incredible story of Frank William Abignale, the legendary con man who changed the history of fraudery. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. Frank William Abignale Jr. was born in 1948 to Frank and Paulette Abignale in Bronxville, New York. He had 3 other siblings and grew up in a good childhood environment. He had a stable home with loving and attentive parents. Frank had the father who gave him all the fatherhood affection and love, which was not the typical elements of someone who would later climb the FBI's top most wanted lists. Frank's life of crime started by the age of 15, and the first victim of one of many cons was his father, who provided him with a gas card and a truck as well. This was done so Abignale could commute to and from his part-time job. He took the gas card and worked out a scheme with people at different gas stations. Abignale would claim on the card to purchase tires or batteries, as well as other items from the gas station. Instead of getting the items, the attendants would give him cash. This worked too well until his father received a bill of $3,000 debts that the crime was discovered. During Frank's teenage years, his parents' marriage deteriorated, which made them decide to divorce. Frank did not know about it, as the divorce was kept secret from him until the day of the proceeding. He was then called to attend the courthouse while he was at school. When the judge asked the 16-year-old Frank Jr. to choose the parents with whom he wanted to live, he was unable to choose between his parents and ran away in tears, fleeing to Manhattan, New York. While in New York, Frank managed to get a job where he miserably earned $1.50 per hour, which was the minimum wage at the time. He believed that his age was the reason why he didn't get enough payments. He then managed to alter his driver license, with changing the birth year from 1948 to 1938, adding 10 years to his age. Frank had always appeared older than his age, as he was 6 foot tall and had premature graying of his hair, which helped him look like a 20-something-year-old. The struggle continued for Frank, which made him unfulfilled with making just over minimum wage, and that's what gave him the motive to turn to check fraud in order to increase the income. Frank's early scheme was basic. He would open bank accounts in his own name, overdraw the accounts and disappear. But this didn't work for long. The banks would catch up with him and demand him to pay them, which caused Abignale to open several accounts in many different banks. It also required him to invent new identities for the fraud to be successful. But Abignale wasn't satisfied with this one fraud. He was determined to try with different ways to defraud the bank. He was able to print out copies of payroll checks that looked real. When he was depositing these fraudulent checks, he would ask for the bank to give him a cash advance based on what his account balance would be after the deposit. He would also place his account number on the bottom of a bank's blank deposit slips and add these to the real ones the bank provided for customers to use. When people or companies used his deposit slips, they would automatically go into Abignale's account. Frank wasn't satisfied with the money he gained from the bad checks, so he decided to move to a bigger level in his fraud game and pass checks on a much grander scale by posing as a pilot. And his real motive behind impersonating an airline pilot was that he could fly around the world and not have to pay. He called Pan American World Airways and told them that he was a pilot who had lost his uniform. They then provided him with a new one, and after getting the uniform, Abignale forged the Federal Aviation Administration pilot's license to complete his new identity. In addition to passing checks in much higher dollar amounts by posing as a pilot, it is estimated that he flew to over 25 countries on over 249 flights, as he took advantage of the pilots being able to fly for free on any plane, Moreover, he was able to stay in the big hotels, eating great food, and enjoying the luxurious lifestyle, and all of that was billed to the airline who paid for everything. However, Abignale decided to leave the pilot's persona after he broke the protocol once and was about to be spotted. So he left the job believing his false display could potentially be identified by real Pan American pilots or employees who would ask for genuine identification or proof of employment. Following his pilot experience, Frank turned his impersonation as a doctor. Although it was not intentional, it started when he filled out a form to rent an apartment, and Abignale put a pediatrician down as his occupation. In the complex where he lived, many physicians resided there. Abignale's friend was one of them. When asked by his physician friend, Abignale agreed to be the supervisor for resident interns at a local hospital where his friend worked. Frank toured the local hospital and used its library in order to add legitimacy to his claims. He did not perform any actual medical procedure. He spent 11 months there until he was nearly exposed when a newborn became critically unwell from oxygen deprivation, and Frank didn't understand the meaning of the situation when a nurse informed him of a blue baby. But when he realized that doing so could have life and death consequences, Frank abandoned that persona and left the area. Frank Abignale was a master of deception. He was able to change his identity and persona with ease. So he moved to Louisiana, where he forged the Harvard University law transcripts. He used these forged documents to take the Louisiana State Bar exam. Frank passed the state's bar exam successfully within 9 weeks, which was remarkable considering that Frank stopped at the 10th grade of his high school education. Frank got the job as a properly licensed attorney at the age of 19. He spent 8 months at this job and resigned after a man in the office where he worked started digging in his college background. Frank assumed many identities. It is estimated that he had stolen $2.5 million and traveled across the world as a deadhead. Eventually, he was on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, as the FBI have been actively pursuing him since he was 16. By 1969, Abignale was wanted by a dozen countries on charges of fraud. He was arrested in Montpellier, France at the age of 20. At this time, he spent 6 months in the Perpignan prison where he suffered under cruel conditions. He was then sent to Sweden where he was found guilty for forgery and served another 6 months, then extradited to the United States to complete his sentence. While Frank was on the way to the United States, he escaped from a plane in New York City at night and headed to the Bronx where he got keys to a bank in Canada where he had thousands of dollars, and while he was waiting to catch a plane and escape to Brazil, he got arrested and turned to the United States again. Frank's will to flee did not stop at this. While he was waiting for trial in Georgia, Frank tried to manipulate the prison administration by acting as an undercover inspector. He used a friend of his outside the prison who acted as his fiancée and journalist. She identified Abignale as an undercover prison inspector and gave the prison administration a fake card identifying him. In results, he convinced the prison administration to let him go before the FBI arrived to confirm his identity. He got out and went to Washington, D.C., but he was eventually captured trying once again to get to a flight to Brazil. Abignale was sentenced to serve 12 years at a federal correctional institution in Virginia. By 1974, after serving only 4 years of his sentence, he was offered a chance to be part of a fraud investigators team to help the government spot international scam artists, in which he only had to sign in once a week. Frank continued to work for the FBI without payment even after fulfilling his full sentencing requirement. Moreover, he paid back the stolen $2.5 million despite it wasn't a term of his parole or probation. After his release, Abignale was on various television shows. He used his skills this time for goodwill, as he approached the bank with an offer to lecture his staff on how to spot tricksters and fraudulent checks, which paved his way to become a security expert who offers his services to banks, law agencies, and more. Numbers say that more than 14,000 financial institutions, corporations, and law enforcement agencies used his fraud protection programs. And for Frank, it is clear and evident that he doesn't want to be remembered for his teenage crimes, but for the chance he used to raise a good family and his transformation from a con man to a leading security expert, which is an inspirational story of a man who made mistakes learned from them, and used his experience to go against what once was his biggest passion. So do you think that Frank was a guy that luck took his side every time, or he was smart enough to manage to find a solution every time he needed to? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more videos of crime and mysteries and much more interesting stories. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.